My name is Dick Heitman. I'm a volunteer at the Marchfield Air Museum here. Today is April 22nd, 2010. I flew B-52s for about 11 years in the Air Force, retired from the Air Force here at March in 1974. We'd like to give you a little look at the B-52 we have at the museum here. So if you're ready, let's go take a look at it. Okay, here we are at the front of the B-52. We'll do a little walk around here. First part is, you'll notice this is the entry hatch. This is the way that the front crew members, the 5 crew members up front, this is how you get in to the airplane and out of the airplane. It's part of the escape ejection hatch for the navigator. Let's do a little walk around here, take a look at a few of the main things. The B-52 has a unique landing gear system. It has what we call 4 trucks. As you can see, there's 4 gear onto the front and two separate columns here, the same like in the back. The B-52 has a unique crosswind crab landing system, which we'll take a look at when we get inside. But you can actually turn those gear left or right so that you can land in a crosswind and keeping your wings level. Going down along the wing here, you see that there's 8 engines total. There's 2 pods on each wing, which have 2 engines to a pod. In this particular model of the B-52, which is a D model, built in 1956, we had, I think these are the J57 engines, had about 12,000 pounds of thrust each. So as we go on further down to towards the end of the wing here, we have a huge fuel tank on the end of each wing, 3,000 gallons of fuel. And you'll notice also that there is a small, we call them the tip gear, hanging down right alongside the fuel tank here. When these fuel tanks are full, when the airplane is fully loaded, those gear are actually touching the ground. And so the purpose of those gear is to keep the wing tips and stuff up off the ground if they happen to go sideways. The wingspan is 185 feet on this particular airplane. It is about 148 feet long from nose to tail. And as we get back here to see the tail, the height of the tail is about 48 feet. So we have a rather large airplane going here. We'll go back along the back side of the wing here and take a look at the positioning of the bomb bay. The bomb bay doors are open in here, and we can take a look inside, but that's the length of the bomb bay. The total inside is all bomb bay in there. The fuel is carried in the wings and in tanks above the bomb bay and up in what we call the center wing. So there's fuel basically all over this airplane, the wings and above the bomb bay. One of the features of this D model is that we had a tail gunner who was physically located in the tail of the airplane, separated by well over 100 feet from the front part of the crew. As we go to the back, we'll show you a little door. This is how the tail gunner got into his compartment. Obviously, before we would start engines, we would bring a stand over here, and you can probably see the little red outline of there. That was the tail compartment, or entry into the tail compartment for the gunner. So he would go back into his section there. The tail compartment was pressurized, and he had his own little station in the back there. In an emergency, he could come all the way to the forward cockpit if we were depressurized, a little catwalk through there, but this was his normal way to get in and out of the tail gunner's turret, which he operated the tail guns obviously with radar and also by visual. Kind of go back up here. Maybe we can take it just a look into the bomb bay. The D model airplane here was used extensively in Vietnam for the bombing from high altitude. On this particular type of airplane, we could carry 108 500-pound bombs. In the bomb bay, we would carry 84 500-pound bombs. And then under each wing, there was a pylon where we could carry 12 500-pound bombs or 750-pound bombs under each wing for a total of 108 500-pound bombs. So we're looking at a little over 40,000 pounds of weapons. This is the interior of the bomb bay. Obviously, it's pretty well stripped out. You know, this airplane was built to carry everything from nuclear weapons to iron bombs. So depending on the weight load and what the mission was the various types of munitions that we carried. But this was the total size of the bomb bay. Along this one side is the catwalk where the gunner could come forward. You can see it's probably less than a foot or less than 18 inches. So if he was required to come forward and this thing was full, you can see he would have to crawl his way along through those places, through the wheel wells, and then all the way up forward. This is generally the complete kind of the exterior of the airplane. So let's go inside now and take a look up in the big cockpit. Okay, as we pointed out, the entry into the forward cockpit is up this little narrow stairway here, and as you come up to the first level, as we call it, the first deck, this is where the navigator sits and the bombardier sits. Their station is down on the first deck here. You can see there's no windows out, and so they perform their job in the dark, so to speak. To go on up then into the top of the second floor is up this little ladder, and I'll just get on up to the Okay, we're on the second deck, or on the top level now of the cockpit. I'm sitting on the floor here. Off to my right or behind there is where the electronics warfare officer sat, behind the gray panel there. And as you can see, this was normally used for storage of our bags and that. There was some more equipment up here. So this is the part where normally you can't stand up in here anymore. And I'm going to move on up into the pilot seat then, which is the left side here. Okay, this is the front cockpit, the pilot on the left seat, the co-pilot on the right seat. This is one of the earlier airplanes built, and so the instrumentation and everything in here is as it was when we were flying them, when they first started flying in '56. And this type of airplanes, this one was actually stationed at March here. Until they found some mechanical problems with it. So all of this is how they were. We have no fancy gauges or glass cockpits on it. But a few pointers of the B-52 here. From this position is where we did our refueling, obviously. The refueling receptacle is back up over us, probably about 6 to 8 feet from behind where we're sitting. And so as you drive up behind the tanker, you're looking at his belly, And when you get up close enough to the boom is going to go over your head and connect back up behind you, and then the fuel goes into the tanks. The systems are the old round dial system, and in the B-52, starting off with what everybody's sick. So what are all of these for? You have 8 engines, so you got 8 throttles, obviously. So that is a handful of throttles here. This is the main control panel between the 2 pilots. They both can reach this. Each pilot has a complete set of flight instruments so that you can fly it from either side. Again, going into the side panels, the pilot had panels for a lot of the hydraulic systems here. And there's circuit breaker panels behind me. I don't know if you can, literally hundreds of little circuit breakers. That's how we either detected problems or something or reset the circuit breaker. The co-pilot's responsibilities were to run the fuel panel. He had a separate panel right in front of him which showed all the fuel tanks, and that's how he refueled. He could open and close the gauges or the tanks and also transfer fuel in flight, keep the weight and balance in line, plus he had electrical panels. Looking through here, a couple of things. Obviously, your gear handle is for both people here. You have lights for your gear lights. A couple of these instruments up here have to do with bombing runs. You have a position direction indicator, which the radar can lock in for you from his radar and tell you go left or right. Probably one of the unique features of the B-52, as we talked about below, was the crosswind crab landing gear. You can set your gear. And this is the big thing, which how you did that. You could compute on the chart what the crosswind was, bring that up, and while you're in the air, you turn this a certain number of degrees and set it. And so when you're coming into land, if you have a crosswind from either way, the fuselage of the airplane is going to be looking left or right. So the first few times, it's a little unique to see your runway, let's say, off to the runway here. So you're actually coming in on the side. However, the gear are lined up on the runway, so when you touch down, you're going to roll down the runway, and then you just take the crab out and you line up with it. So it's just something to get used to on that part of it. We have, every once in a while, get questions about the throttle quadrant here, and people will say, well, why do you have these here, and why are the throttles up here, and 2 of them are different length? The purpose for having kind of 2 identifying things are the bottom one, this row, are closer together, you can get them all into one hand. So you use this when you want the whole group of throttles to go forward for takeoff or you're adjusting power. Now the reason that they have numbers 4 and 5, which are the 2 inboards on each side, they're at a different height, so that if I'm flying along here, and a lot of times the pilot will just keep their hand on the throttles or refueling, I can reach up and I find these 2 throttles without looking at them and know that this is number 4 and 5. If I need a little bit of power, maybe I can use that, or I can bring those back. So I don't have to move the whole bunch of throttles. Plus, you'll notice these are spread out a little bit, so I can reach up. Okay, this is number 8, 7, 6. I can do it by feel for the throttle system, so that helps you control. As again, the throttle, there's only 1 throttle for each engine. There's no mixture control, prop control. This controls everything from your fuel flow and from the time you start, and everything else on that is by this 1 control for each of the engines. So the reason for having kind of 2 sets of throttles, but they're all hooked to the same thing. One of the other things I'd like to point out is that on this particular airplane, or on the B-52s, the people that sit up in the top deck, we call it the pilot, the co-pilot, and the electronics warfare, we have upward ejection seats. Ejection seats that will shoot us up. Coming up from down below there, from the pilot or the navigator and the radar bombardier, they have downward ejection seats, so they have a whole different situation. But for their normal ejection here, you can see a lot of these things are rusted out. You have armrest, and on each side of the armrest are your levers, we'll call it. So the purpose when to prepare for ejection, you get in your seat, your parachute is behind you, you have the shoulder harnesses on. When you initiate the ejection, when it's time to go, this whole hatch up above that has two windows, and if you can see this yellow line, it goes quite a ways back here. There's one of those above each of the pilots here. That is the first thing that's going to go. Obviously, you want the hatch to go so the seat can get out. And when you start your arming sequence, when you pull the lever, there's little lifters there. We'll get up into the airflow. So everything inside of that yellow line will go. Then you have an open, clear space for your seat to go. So when your seat goes, you want to be sure that your legs are back in. The control columns will automatically stow. They will go all the way forward and lock into position, because you sure would not want to have your knees under the control column when you went out. So the control column is stowed, you're sitting into your seat, and when you pull the lever to go, this whole seat that I'm sitting in has a charge, and it will shoot out above the top of the airplane. And then once you get clear of the airplane, the thing will, you can get rid of your seat, you just kind of step out of it. The part of it will go, the shoulder harnesses will release. You'll have your parachute and your survival kit, which you're sitting on here. It all becomes part of you. And if you're unconscious or whatever, the parachutes are set to open at 14,000 feet if you're coming down. So it's all pretty much automatic, but you've got to be sure, first of all, that that hatch is gone. If it doesn't go and your seat doesn't go, then you've got to go back downstairs and manually bail out one of the open hatches, primarily the navigator's hatch. So the ejection system works good in this particular airplane. The other controls, someone we were talking about, the panel, overhead panel as we call it. The things that I said are in the center of the airplane, or this here is for use by both pilots. And on our particular panel in here, the front portion is used for setting up for air refueling. It has lights on there that says when you're ready, you can open the air refueling doors on the top of the B-52. So this is all done through this control panel here. Coming back, we have some more radio panels here, and then we have some lights for interior lights and that. And then way back where you probably the pilot can't reach, you have to get out, is you have some more circuit breakers on there. So you'll notice a couple of things maybe that are in have red switches, or they have like caution signals on them. Up there, there's one. There's a couple of them down below here. The red switches are for safety purposes. The one way down on the right side of this panel that's outlined, that is the bailout, a warning switch, or whatever you want to call it. So if you come to the point where the pilot is going to get the people to bail out, going to flip this switch. Normally it's safety wired down, and the red warning lights will come on down below. The bell will ring, and that's one of the things that will help alert the crew to get them on out. Just a little, I guess, a procedure for a takeoff. Obviously, with the jet engines, you have one throttle control. There's no mixture, prop controls, or anything like that. So when you're lined up at the end of the runway, you have everything set for takeoff. Through the checklist, you have your trim is set. The flaps are set at a certain position, the flap panel being here. And you do a complete check through that everything is looking good and you're fine to go. So when it's your time to go, all you do is grab this handful of throttles and push them all the way forward. And as you're rolling along, you're just monitoring or holding on to the airplane. Your trim is set. To steer onto the runway, first of all, is rudder steering. You just move your rudder pedals left and right, just like probably your Cessna 172. You steer the rudder, and you have brake on the top of those. But going down the runway, you watch your speeds. The radar navigator calls you out a speed check, and when you're committed, all you do is a very light back pressure on the controls, because this airplane does not climb rapidly. As you get it just to break ground, if you've seen the B-52, it kind of elevates. It's almost in a level attitude, but it climbs up on. And from there on, you just go out, get to pick up your airspeed, and normally at this time, while you're climbing, your throttle's at 100%. That's what it is. You're just hoping that all of your power is going through. And of course, all of the engine instruments here show you your power settings that you have, and it tells you if you got a problem or not. So you see there's 8 across the top, so that's one for each of the engines. And then the row going down tells you everything about that engine. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Engines are numbered from left to right. And when everything is operating normal, the little gauges will all be kind of in the same line. So it's easy to see as you glance up there. If there's one out of kilter, you're going to know what it is. And of course, practice and simulator time, you'll take care of if there's an emergency on there. And so once you get up to your climbing altitude, your flaps will come up, and it's just steady. You just go on, put on the autopilot. All your autopilot controls are through here again. The center control column is so it's available to each person. We have different modes of autopilot actually. We have one for air refueling, one for low level. And all that does is it's kind of like power steering. You actually fly the airplane, however, you get a little feedback on it, and it's not an immediate thing. Say this is, you have your autopilot control here for turning, for elevate control, and with your radar for low level, which is a whole nother story on there. But your main flight controls, you have speed brakes on this side. I call them speed brakes, which are just spoilers on the wings to come up when to slow down or when you come into land. You put those out. This particular level here is for the brake chute. We have a chute on this airplane, so once you're on the ground, the co-pilot will pull that thing out, and the big chute pops out on the back, right out by the gunner's turret there. For in cruise and everything else, it's a real stable airplane. It's either on autopilot. That's probably the best way to fly it, because trying to fly for 10 or 12 hours manually controlling is a big job. Like I said, for air refueling, you just find your tanker. The tanker is going to be in front of you there, and as you look at the belly of the airplane, of the tanker, you're able to see his wings out to the side. So it's like, to a pilot, it's like a big attitude indicator. If he turns, all you do is to keep your wings level with him, and sometimes you don't even know if he is turning in a bank or climbing or descending. You're just flying on that airplane. Of course, they have some lights on the belly which will tell you a little bit if you're leaving the envelope in that. But air refueling is one of the, I think, one of the better experiences of flying this airplane. Most pilots can do it. Every once in a while you find a pilot that just cannot get to the air refueling part of it. So it's always a little bit of a challenge, but it's enjoyable after you've been hooked on for 20, 22 minutes and you picked up your fuel load without a disconnect. It gives you a little self-satisfaction to know that you are still able to do that. For landing, it's just kind of the reverse of takeoff. You have your trim settings set up on that. You have an airspeed to fly according to your weight. So as you're making your approach and down, you just control your throttles the same way. You bring them back a little bit. You're manually flying the airplane. You will have different flap settings. Normally you have a flap setting pre-computed. So when you're coming down, the flap lever, well, these are all hardwired in there now. But you just set the flap setting for what it is, and on the normal approach, say flying the airspeed is critical. Come down and line up with your runway, and if you can bleed that airspeed off nice and slow, keep your airplane. You want to land in almost a level attitude. The idea being that touchdown in your rear gear, just that second before the nose gear comes down. So if you're in the right attitude, you'll have a greaser on there. And again, taxiing is the same thing, just rudder pedals, brakes on there, nothing fancy about it. I flew B-52s for about 11 years, and I spent probably about 6 of those years flying this type of airplane, the D model. I participated in a number of missions over Vietnam, Southeast Asia, during the time from 1968 to 1972. I was fortunate, I guess, that probably was shot at but never got hit. I did have probably one of my most enlivening experiences was in December 1972 when they called the 11-Day War, the bombing of Hanoi. My crew and I, flew on the first night on December 18th, and it was quite some sight to see the missiles and stuff coming through the undercast, coming up at you. You're looking. We have probably, I think there was over 100 B-52s in the wave that night. So that was probably my most memorable experience in the B-52. But like I say, we all got back. Some of our crews didn't. I was stationed here at March. We were TDY at the time, and several of the crews from March were shot down. Some were POWs, and some didn't make it back. But overall, I enjoyed my experience flying the B-52. And as you know, they are still flying B-52s to this day. The H models they're called. They were built in 1960, 1961. So they're 50 years old, but they're still going. And we just have a real good airplane, and we're happy to have this particular one here at March. A couple of the fellows that did a lot of the restoration work inside here have done a tremendous job on it. And so coming back and sitting in this seat is always kind of a memory reminder for me, and I enjoy doing this type of work with the museum and for the people here. So thank you. That kind of concludes my little story, little highlights of flying the B-52 and my own experiences in it. Hope you can come out to the March Field Air Museum sometime and at least see the outside of our B-52.